So I'm with David Andrews, who's been working on the car for the past 3 years, been working on the Bloody Mary. How did you get involved with it, David?
Initially, I was asked to make the final piece in the jigsaw of putting it all back together again, which was a new conrod.
Okay.
The conrod's shorter than standard, so it needed somebody who did one-off stuff, which is where my expertise comes from.
Right.
Made the conrod. Sandy Skinner being the intermediary and the contact between good friend of John's when he was alive, was in charge of getting it sorted out, with Rosemary's blessing, obviously. I made the conrod, went away. I thought the job had gone completely, and then he came back with the conrod 6 months later and said, Rosemary and I have had a chat, I've spoken to people around and we think you're the man to finish it all off. Are you prepared to take the job on? So,
and you were happy to do so?
Well, I took about a microsecond to decide, how can you not want to be involved in Bloody Mary?
Exactly. Exactly.
When I was that big, I saw him going up in 1963. I've even got a picture taken on my Brownie 127.
Really?
Yeah, and it's got the Wayne Elm fencing they used to have at Pardon, and I took the picture of the fencing, and it's got Bloody Mary on one side with a fence post right in the middle because I wasn't tall enough to be above it. But yeah, absolutely.
You never realised then that you'd end up actually driving it up and down Prescott track?
Absolutely not. I mean, in that respect, you have to pinch yourself. It's the classic thing, isn't it? But it's fine. And in the meantime, I've got totally into the whole thing as well. The whole concept, the whole design of it is so clever and so, it worked.
Yeah.
And the proof of the pudding is how good it was.
Well, tell us something about the history of it, David. What do you know about the history of the car from when John first put it together?
John and his brother Richard put it together, late 20s.
Right.
In fact, originally they were going to make it as a pedal car.
Really?
And then they got hold of a side valve Jap engine, which was only about 15 horsepower probably, put that in and decided, maybe they could use that and run up and down in the fields with it.
Right.
And then they got involved into varsity stuff, I think, motor club stuff, and then they both ran the car and they tuned up the side valve as much as they possibly could.
Right.
And they shared the drives originally.
Yes.
And then I think it's not a very easy thing to drive in a straight line, apparently.
Really?
I'll let you know later. But basically, not an easy car to drive. It's very short. Even with the single side valve engine, it was quite exciting to drive. And Richard had a bad experience and nearly not died, but he frightened himself.
Really? What was that?
At one of the InterVarsity things, and after that, he decided John ought to stick with Bloody Mary. He made his own, and he had.
Right.
They were called Bolster Specials at the time,
Yes.
and Richard had his own one with various engines. One of them had 4 single-cylinder engines in it, and things. So they sort of diverged at that point. I think that was late 20s, early 30s.
Okay.
And then John persevered with this, and then with the single overhead valve engine, when he had a friend who crashed his Bruff Superior, and the engine, we'll have that, and we'll go in Bloody Mary. And I think, to be fair, at the time, I think he'd gone as far as they could with the side valve engine anyway. Yeah. They nearly won a couple of meetings, and so they were all getting enthusiastic on, we can do better, and went from there. And it was only in late, I think, 1932 that another friend crashed their Buff Superior, and a second engine became available, that he even contemplated the idea of putting the 2 engines in.
Right. And putting the 2 engines together has made it as fast as it was in its class, or?
When he first did it, it wasn't that fast. He was agonising over how to make it go faster with spending the minimum money, which is, that was the idea at the time. And he looked at supercharging, he looked at all the other standard ways to go, and somebody said, well, you just stick another engine in. Yeah. And he realised it was probably the most cost-effective way of doing it if he could make it work. And I think he had quite a lot of trouble initially blowing up gearboxes, snapping the chains between the engines and all sorts of things.
And in those days, how available were spares and just easy enough to go and get another engine just like that?
Yes, but Japs were a supplier of engines to anybody who wanted them, providing you paid the money. And I know John wasn't... He came from a wealthy background, but he didn't spend a lot of money. He avoided money, like we all do. We're prudent. If you could
Rosemary tells me it was built for about 25 quid at the time.
Yes, indeed. Which, is more money now, but clearly it was done on a budget. Yeah. And he was... The best source of engines was crash Bruff Superiors.
Really?
Courtesy of Lawrence of Arabia and people like that. Yeah. But you could still get... There were the people who tuned them at the time, and he had tuning done on them, and there were people who could supply Japs could still supply the spare parts. So yes, they were the obvious thing. Like the bike engine things are nowadays, a Hayabusa engine or an R1, get them out of a bike, put it in a hill climb car, away you go. And ironically, it's all turned a bit full circle because, that's what they're doing now with the Jedis and and the things. We've even one here today with 2 Hayabusas in it, 2-litre modern racing car. And in that respect, he was 50 years ahead of his time, as well, 80 years ahead of his time.
What makes Bloody Mary so unique?
A combination, I suppose, of how successful it was, the fact that John Bolster was a journalist, which meant that he made sure everybody knew about it, to be fair, and he wasn't an engineer, he was a farmer and a journalist eventually, but he come up with a plan that was really good. And to be fair, in its heyday, he beat ERAs, which was the fastest thing in England at the time.
Really?
Okay, he couldn't have beat an Auto Union or a Mercedes-Benz up a hill climb, but he could give the ERAs a run for his money. But it was made at home. It has a wooden chassis. It started off as a pedal car. He did a drawing when he was 18, when he was doodling when he should have been working at school. Well, we did that, and it's so like it even now.
Really?
But and it just grew and grew, and he developed it.
Yeah.
And it's iconic in that respect. And there are people around the world who don't know about rotor racing, but they've heard of Bloody Mary or Bolster Specials or John Bolster. So it's fair. So that's why it's so special.
Yeah. And how much success did he have with it in its day?
He was fastest time of the day. He's the equivalent of Roy Lane 20 years ago, or Dandy Prio 10 years ago, but with a homemade special.
Yeah.
Which was
phenomenal.
A pure English thing to do. Yeah, it's a real up against it, David and Goliath sort of situation.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it worked.
Okay.
And it got a reputation for being a special thing. So many people who are in their 50s and 60s now remember it in the late, because he used it again after the war. He had most of his success probably after the Second World War. He got it going. He actually ditched this one and made a 4-engine one, and he got it wrong. Didn't work.
Right.
It was too powerful. It hadn't got enough grip.
Yeah.
And he reckoned it just really wasn't successful at all. And the war came along. The 4-engine one, he never had a chance to develop it properly before the war came along. After the war, he decided it was prudent, scrapped the 4-cylinder one. He had an affection for this because he'd grown with it. He was from when he was an 18-year-old. He'd been with him. He'd thrown it in the back of the shed, robbed the engines out of it to make the 4-engine one, along with 2 more. And when he came to it, he said, after the war, times of impunity, no money about, no fuel. Hey, come on, let's get it out, see if we can get it going again. And he was one of the first people after the war to get a pre-war racing car going. And they had a meeting, I can't remember what it was now, near Watford. And all the people that had racing cars from before the war got them out. It was about 3 months after the end of the declaration of the Second World War. And they had a meeting, and they all turned up, and the police were, and it was fuel rationing and everything. And they all turned up on methanol, and there were people, anybody who was anybody turned up. And I know John got it there. And he put the engines back in, and then he realised he had so much affection for this car rather than the 4-engine car that he just forgot the idea of ever getting the 4-engine car going again and went back to this. And he used it from 46 right through to mid-50s, I believe. I'm saying corrected on that one.
Okay.
And he was, after the war, when there wasn't too much going on, he was the man. He was, and it was true David and Goliath, which is why it's got such an affection for everybody even now.
Excellent.
Wooden chassis, made at home, done by a man, wealthy class, but he was beating the establishment. He was beating the best that anybody else could come up with.
Okay, so then we went through a period of time when the car wasn't used for a long time, and obviously John eventually passed away, bringing us more up to date. So when you got involved with it, what was the first amount of work you had to do on it? What was the first few jobs?
We need to go back a little bit on stage from there. It went into, after 63, when the last time he actually used it, it went into Bewley. He wanted to go to Bewley because it was just somewhere else to store it, to be honest. And he knew he could still own it, but it'd be stored for him, if you like. And it stayed there for a while, wasn't used. And to be fair, it was pretty worn out when he finished using it. I think he knew. And it'd been there about 10 years. I think it was like the mid-70s when Sandy Skinner persuaded Rosemary to let a journalist come out and do an article on it. And the journalist, unfortunately, wrecked it, basically, much to traumatise poor Rosemary and Sandy, for that matter, who felt morally obliged, responsible, culpable anyway. And it was blown, the front engine was blown to pieces, shrapnel, absolutely, completely destroyed.
Good heavens.
And Sandy took it on the chin in a way. He felt, it wasn't his fault, nothing to do with him, but he felt morally obliged to try and sort the job out because he was the one that persuaded Rosemary to get it out when it could have been just sat in the thing. and the journalist didn't want to take much responsibility, walked away a bit, basically. So Sandy started a process over about a 10-year period of collecting together when people were making bits suitable. If a barrel was being cast, he'd get a barrel. I mean, we were talking to a totally destroyed engine and it broke a conrod and wrecked the crankcases.
Wow.
I mean, broke some of the brackets for other things. I mean, it was like a major blow up. And I got involved because he asked me to do the last piece in the jigsaw, which was actually the conrod, to replace the conrod that broke, that caused the problem in the first place.
Yeah.
But Sandy Skinner must take a lot of the credit because he worked on, got the brakes sorted out, got all the carburation sorted out from when it was in the museum before it got run by the journalist, and then did all the work afterwards to get all the bits together to get the engine sorted out. And then, luckily, I've been making Jap engines for 30 years, or rebuilding them for people, creating them or whatever. And he felt, because we tend to do things sympathetically, hopefully, and they didn't want it doing a complete rebuild regardless of the cost with new bits, that I ought to be the person to try and sort it out, finish it off, doing the minimum to make it run reliably, show what it used to be like, but not necessarily throw brand new bits at it regardless and race it. And to be fair, Rosemary doesn't want it, and I agree with her, raced in earnest, partly because it wouldn't fit any health and safety regulations. It's been invented since 1950. And also because it is so unique, it is so original. We've even, when they were repairing the engine, they even rebuilt the original crankcases using other crankcases, cut up into little pieces and welded together. So we're conscious of its fragility, and we're conscious that it is a genuine piece of history.
Well, it's certainly retained all its original character, hasn't it?
I mean, it's not just patina, it is actually, a lot of the stuff is actually what he used when he last used it. Okay, we've had to do a few things in deference to getting it running reliably. I've had to put alter the thing that takes the steering wheel off so I can get off it easier rather than having to have a spanner. And we had to put an ignition switch on it, but it's obviously a new ignition switch so that no one thinks we're kidding anybody. But the rest of it, the broken tin and the cracks and the bits and pieces and the wood screws are the same ones.
All exactly as John.
And the rear engine is more or less the same as almost certainly the way he ran it. We pulled it apart, just checked, rudimentary checks, put it back together. And I'm pleased. I like the idea that it's like that. It's such a gem of history. It's like a time warp, really.
And so what's the future for the car? Are you going to continue maintaining it and keep taking it to these hill climbs and exhibitions?
I'm very proud to have been awarded primary status in terms of running it and driving it. Rosemary's, I understand, is as pleased as she can possibly be.
She is delighted, I can assure you.
With what we've done.
I
think she sees us as a bit of a kindred spirit with John and how he was anyway. Being somewhat old-fashioned in my values and ways. So she's, what we basically propose, and fully with Rosemary's backing, is that when it's not being used, it's loaned whilst she's around, and it's intended to come out a couple of times a year at what we decide as suitable venues and suitable events. Not going to be flogged to death. It's going to go somewhere where it's going to be appreciated, where people who've not seen it before remember it from when they were kids but haven't had a chance to see it run or hear it.
Certainly here at Prescott, I've been very aware people have been coming up to it who obviously saw it in its early days and absolutely blown away seeing it.
Absolutely. Ironically, the smell and the sound is as important as seeing it going along to most people. Because it's unusual, there are very few double-engined hill climb cars, double-engined anything, certainly double-engined V-twin vehicles in the world. People are just fascinated to know what it's going to sound like. And it sounds like you'd imagine, even though I didn't know what it was going to sound like till I ran it. It sounds Irish. But no, it will serve its purpose if we run it sensibly, we run it at a fair speed so that you can see what it could do, and don't do anything stupid. Look after the engines, and hopefully it's with the right person who can repair it if we have to. It can go on for years.
Good many years to come.
Probably outlast me.
Well, David, thank you very much. I know Rosemary is absolutely thrilled that you are driving it and maintaining it, and it's just lovely to see it going up and down these hill climbs. It's amazing.
To her eternal credit, she could have just insisted it stayed in the museum. She hasn't.
And it should be used, shouldn't it?
In fact, as a footnote, she gave me a signed copy of John's autobiography because I don't have one. When I got approval, I suppose. And in it, there's a paragraph when he was talking about veteran cars at the time, because it was in the late 30s and 40s when it was written, and there's a paragraph in it that I actually sent back to her when she decided we were going to use it again, and it describes how he felt that it was no good putting cars in museums because they died and they need to be smelt and heard, only just on occasion, used in a sensible fashion so people could appreciate what they were like, but not necessarily used all the time. And to her credit, that's exactly what's going to happen to it.
Exactly.
I'm so pleased, and I hope everybody else is.
Well,
so
the car lives on. I think with your enthusiasm, John lives on as well, and I think that's absolutely marvellous. Thanks a lot, David.
How can you not want to be involved in Bloody Mary? I like the idea that it's like that. It's such a gem of history. It's a classic thing, isn't it? It's no good putting cars in museums because they died and they need to be smelt and heard.